Good evening. Welcome to In the Dark with Todd Harris Jr. I am your host, your ghost host. On this, the first of many episodes I plan to bring you in my new podcast series, we will explore the various realms of the unknown and the darkness that sometimes awaits us beneath the surface. There's always an element of fear whenever the dark is near. But I promise to lead you back into the light once we are finished. I'd like to take this opportunity before we go into tonight's subject and briefly explain what the show will consist of. I had envisioned a show like this one for quite some time now. One that not so much focused on fanboy-related material, but perhaps contained more of analysis into certain areas that pop culture often borrows from in order to produce a wealth of entertainment, as well as elevating things to a cult-like status. One such example is the UFO phenomenon. In addition to my regular monthly topic, there will be a storytime element to my podcast as well, where I'll take an excerpt from a short story or poem and give you, the audience, my interpretation of that work through narrating it and then briefly discussing it. Tonight, in fact, for my very first story time, I'm taking you on a ghostly sea voyage across ancient oceans of years past, with sailboat Fred and his doomed crew of passengers. So, now that I've somewhat given a brief little overview of how my show will work, let's go right into tonight's dark topic, shall we? Tonight I will be debunking the myth behind the phenomenon known as the modern day versus the ancient zombie legend. I chose this particular topic as my very first because it was an area that I hadn't done much of a deep dive into before. When one thinks about the word zombie, it often conjures many thoughts and ideas. The most current and what is considered to be the definitive version seems to be the zombie who takes on the form of a flesh-eating human who is neither living nor dead. The popular term which was given is the undead, first made popular by filmmaker George A. Romero. Ironically, he got his start making several short segments for the popular kids' television series, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, out of Philadelphia. This was before his big breakthrough, which came in 1967. In 1967, with just a handful of mostly unknown actors and a small crew, Romero began what would later become known as the now legendary classic film, Night of the Living Dead. I'm about to play a short piece of audio from a documentary film entitled Birth of the Living Dead, where Romero talks about his guerrilla style of filmmaking in just a few short sentences.
Big thing, man. Who knew that we were ever even going to finish this movie? It was just like a bunch of people getting together and we were going to try to make a movie. And none of us knew that it was ever going to get finished, let alone become something as well known as it is.
Now, what you just heard in Romero's own nonchalant way of what he goes on later to describe as a very brutal and uncompromising film shoot, it becomes evident that he and the others who were involved in the making of the film would not really know the true impact that a small, independent feature out of Philadelphia would help spawn. Many countless knockoffs, imitations, and some original ideas in there as well that Night of the Living Dead helped to create. But really, not just the future entertainment that it ultimately inspired, but the word zombie was essentially reinvented out of what it had meant previously. Previously, zombies were seen through the lens of the Haitian religion known as voodoo. One example is the 1932 film White Zombie, which we will discuss later on in the show. Still to this day, many years after the release of Night of the Living Dead, film scholars and fan theories abound as to what the film's cultural as well as social implications continue to be. Some have theorized that since Night of the Living Dead came out in the late 60s, about the same time as America was in the throes of the Vietnam War, and the turmoil caused over civil unrest throughout most of the country, that Night of the Living Dead contained hidden meanings through its use of showing the everyday ordinary citizen being relentlessly stalked by an endless swarm of undead creatures. This was a possible sign of a world, a future that was to come in the wake of Vietnam. Through various interviews that I've watched and documentary films, like the most recent Birth of the Dead, Romero makes clear that what he set out to do was just make a movie with some of his friends and nothing more. Whether or not that was his original intention, it did cause a huge stir and seems to have surpassed many other horror genres by its rebirth into new film and TV shows, the most recent of which was the HBO series The Last of Us. We're going to take a short break, then come back to discuss the 1932 film White Zombie and the vast difference between that film and Night of the Living Dead. Also in a later segment, I plan to call an old friend on the podcast to get his take on the zombie phenomenon and discuss an actual case study which was conducted into the what if of a possible real zombie outbreak. So, stay tuned. More with In the Dark with Todd Harris Jr. right after this. From Plymouth to Cape Finisterre, each sailor to a man will quake and shake in mortal fear on spying the Dutchman. For Vanderdecken's flying boat presages doom at sea. Don't hail his sail when you're afloat, or wrecked ye'll surely be. But now I sing of sailboat Fred, who terrifies no he-man. Tars laugh and chaff at this poor dead, befuddled little seaman. When Freddy breathed, he loved to fish upon a placid stream. Poor lad, he had no other wish, for loafing was his dream. One day on deck, he fell asleep and snoozed till it was morning. A bog of fog was sair a creep, and soon, without a warning, a fearful storm began to rage with furious commotion. It broke the yoke of his moorage and swept him into the ocean. Green Freddy rode the sea so wide, yet could not find the land. His sail so frail bobbed on the tide and never touched the sand. And now his specter seeks the beach as sailors laugh with glee. His ghost the coast still tries to reach because he's late for tea. And every day that he's not home just makes his wife more mad. Each year the fear that she will roam and find him scares him bad. 'Twould mean her patience was no more, and she would have his head, and not a lot of help he'd score, just from the fact he's dead. Welcome back to In the Dark. I am your host, Todd Harris Jr. What you just heard during the break was a lyrical poem entitled The Ghost of Sailboat Fred by Sarah Lee Terry. Now back to tonight's dark topic, the zombie phenomenon. Earlier in the show, I was discussing the impact that the 1967 independent film Night of the Living Dead had on future generations. Let's back up 35 years before 1967 with the release of 1932's Hollywood feature White Zombie. Now, I had never personally seen the film up until deciding to do an episode on zombies, so this was an interesting discovery for me. I was able to track down a nice Blu-ray transfer of the film. Let me just say that I wasn't really expecting the kind of film that White Zombie turned out to be. For starters, the movie has a more gothic tone throughout, rather than the modern documentary feel that Night of the Living Dead had. Another big difference was the actual zombie characters featured in the film. Instead of flesh-eating humans, the movie was set in Haiti, where plantation workers were under the spell of the treacherous madman known as Murder Legendaire, who was played by Bela Lugosi. These plantation workers appeared to be induced by a concoction of herbs while being placed under a hypnotic trance. Bela Lugosi was just fresh off of the success of playing Dracula a year before. The movie was loosely based off of The Magic Island, William B. Saybrook's 1929 novel on Haitian voodoo. While perhaps the film is not the most popular movie in the ever-expanding zombie universe, what sets it apart from others was that it was the first ever film to actually feature zombies. These were not the flesh-eating type, but rather they possessed big, bulging eyes, as if staring off into the distance, like they were completely removed from their former selves. In their place were these complete, subservient beings made to follow Lugosi's every last wish. Here I'm about to play a small bit of audio from the vinyl soundtrack recording of White Zombie, which was just reissued on Waxwork Records. In the clip, there can be heard a Haitian voodoo burial ritual, along with some dialogue. Let's take a listen.
Zombie, the living dead. Corpses taken from their grave.
As you can hear from the very opening of the film's soundtrack, the carriage driver stops in the middle of the road where a funeral seance is being held, and first utters the words, "Zombie, the living dead." It's rather interesting how in the film, the zombies seem more lifelike and just out of reach of being transformed back into their former selves. Rather than the later Romero version, the one that most people are familiar with, which had a much more starker contrast to it. In the Haitian voodoo religion, the act of zombification, that which revives the recent dead into mindless, soulless beings, starts out with blood or hair from the dead victims. This is performed by a bokor, which is a Haitian voodoo sorcerer. In addition to using voodoo dolls, another method involves a carefully prepared mixture known as a powder strike, made of mystical herbs, human remains, and various animal parts. Administering this mixture can also vary from ingestion, injection, or even a blow dart. Once administered, the zombification process is set into motion, with the body already starting to take on its effects, and thereby being controlled by these voodoo sorcerers. So it's pretty clear that the word zombie, at least before Night of the Living Dead's release in 1967, had very little to do with the flesh-eating aspect and was considered more of a religious and ceremonial act. Some of that is apparent in White Zombie's plot, but did not really become the sole basis for what zombies later became to be known for, or the huge impact that a change in direction from mindless servants into flesh-eating monsters would have on generations of creators of film and TV shows. We're going to take another short break, and when we come back, I will be joined on the show by an old friend, where we will discuss some forensic science into the living dead. More of In the Dark right after this. Welcome back to In the Dark with Todd Harris Jr. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I have on the phone with me a very special guest, calling me all the way from Indiana. My old Navy buddy, John Suits. John, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, Todd. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, can you tell us briefly how we came to know one another?
Absolutely. So, stationed in Norfolk up until 2010, but in late 2009, I had received orders to row to Spain at the AFN detachment over there. And before coming there, we had talked on the phone a few times, and
Yeah,
I knew that you were good people.
I remember.
I come to Spain, we hang out, we shoot the shit on the mic, we became good buddies. So, even though you live 2 states away from me, but we're good friends to this day. So that's the long and short of how we know each other.
That sounds great. Now, John, I'd like to ask you a few questions about tonight's dark topic, which is zombies. I've been reading this interesting book from a more forensic science point of view on the possibility of a real zombie outbreak. It's called Zombie CSU, and the book was written a couple years ago by an author named Jonathan Maberry. It's got some pretty interesting stuff in there, just from someone like myself who possesses a very general understanding of the zombie phenomenon. The author does raise some important theories in there, like, for example, about the pacing of an undead person, how they would walk. So I found that interesting. Slow or fast? Personally, I prefer the slow-moving zombie myself. It just looks more believable on screen. Plus, I'm not sure with someone being dead, depending on how long they've been buried in the ground, if it's really plausible for them to move at a potential victim fast, Like, I would think that their limbs would no longer be able to withstand the pressure of walking upright. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm approaching this from a fan standpoint,
Right.
someone who's read into popular culture, into zombie popular culture. I don't have a medical background or
Right.
forensic background or
Right.
anything of that nature, but I would say that a zombie, to be more believable, would have to move slow. Now, the possibility of like a limb falling off or their bones turning into dust after years of being in the ground and the body decaying.
Yeah.
I would think that a zombie would have to move slow. If not, the zombie may just wither and die on the ground because their bones and limbs are breaking apart.
That's a good point. My other thing, though, is that with some of the newer zombie movies and TV shows that have come out in the last decade or so, most of those move extremely fast. So from the point of view of a fan, like you were just saying, I don't find it realistic that someone who's dead could move that fast. Unless they were...
Oh, not why.
Well, unless they were given supernatural powers of another kind, other than the fact that they were... most of the movies that I've seen deal with some kind of viral outbreak or unexplained occurrence that never gets resolved, So for me, I just think that the slow pace also signifies that there is a feeling of inevitability, that the person that's getting stalked by these undead people are eventually going to get eaten. I just have a quick question for you.
Shoot.
Since I know you're from a small town in Indiana, what's the name of the town?
New Palestine.
Yes, New Palestine, Indiana. What would you do in the event of a zombie attack?
Well, I approach this with two different realities. One being the fiction me, and the other being the reality me. The fiction me is going out guns blazing, kicking ass, taking names. I'm the combination of John McClane, Rambo, fucking RoboCop, Terminator, Anakin Skywalker,
Wow.
Darth Vader, all the great ass kickers of fiction.
Don't get offended, but for some reason I don't picture that. I don't know why, but...
Well, that leads to the reality me. The reality me is probably looking for a blunt force object or possibly a flamethrower or using my personal vehicle to mow down zombies.
Wow.
But the reality, I think, is I'd probably get eaten.
Hey, John, you know what I would do if a zombie outbreak occurred?
What's that?
I would pop some popcorn, have some candy in a bowl and some sodas and beer, and I would invite them in for a zombie movie marathon. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Just out of curiosity, what would you watch with them?
Actually, I was thinking about Michael Jackson's Thriller.
I mean, interesting. Not particularly a bad idea. Although I believe the music video is like up to 17 minutes. So I would say treat each minute as if it were your last, because you have to come to the grisly realization that they're gonna fucking eat you.
Exactly. And that's the whole point, is in reality, if a zombie attack really occurred, I'd be screwed. And so
you're fucked, man.
So basically, that's the reason why I would do that. I would want to spend my last minutes on Earth listening to Thriller, watching Thriller with a bunch of zombies.
Now here's a question for you. Do you think they'd be dancing like the King of Pop would? like all the zombies in that video did?
Probably after they ate me, I would. So, yeah. Anyway, John, I had to end it on a light note because I promised the listeners tonight that I would always bring them back into the light. So that's what we
I see what you did there.
That's right. That's what we just did. We brought them back into the light by keeping some dark humor. Anyway, John, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I can't wait to have you on future episodes.
I can't wait, man.
This was In the Dark with Todd Harris Jr. Thanks for listening. Good night. Sleep tight. Pleasant dreams. Until we meet again.